So now we're moving on to the next step of our opening program. And I'm sure you're all as curious as I am to see Melanie Bonajo and the presentation with the longest name in the festival, Can I Get a Cuddle? On the ethics of horror and non-human person labor online. Friday we'll also screen Melanie's film Progress vs. Sunset, that even has a much longer title, but we'll leave that for the moment. After the presentation, Melanie Bonajo will be interviewed by Ilga and Miljon, and you're welcome and invited to join and ask questions in this Q&A. So now, and without any further ado, please welcome Melanie Bonajo.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. Can we switch to my screen?
Alright, so here we are on the elephants. Cool thing about these guys is that they have really long trunks, and that's cool. And that's pretty much all there is to say.
Elephants have really long trunks, pretty cool. That's all there is to say. Does anybody know anything about this video? Exactly, ever uploaded online. So, the lives of non-human animals and online representation is closely interwoven, as we can see on the first video on YouTube with a young man standing in front of an elephant. And that is why the symbol of the animal has drastically changed over the last couple of years. We make more pictures in one day today than in the last 100 years together. It is said now that at the time of the sixth mass extinction, the physical animal kingdom is transformed fully into virtual, imaginary, symbolic realm. The more pictures uploaded, the less species in the wild. There are more animals, pictures, than there perhaps ever was, while the diversity of the species is forever collapsing due to human capitalist-driven choices. One of the immediate notions about these images that I will about to show you is that the animals are in a painful process of being assimilated into human culture. What these images tell us about the human impact on our planet can hardly be underestimated. Rapid decrease of biodiversity, extinction, exhaustion of soil, the unmanageable accumulation of waste, global warming, exponential growth of air pollution, destruction of natural habitat, mass urbanization, we were once here, echoes all over nature. This counts for the numerous animal species on the bridge of extinction, but simultaneously the representation of non-human animals has increased by an enormous extent, and that keeps on expanding. Before the popularization of the internet, only 14 years ago, our main leaders in nature education films and magazines were institutions like National Geographic, Documentary Channel, the BBC. These wildlife documentaries informed us through the lens of biology and science about nature. 100 years after the first wildlife film appeared, the last days of this genre have started in a world where no wilderness has been left untamed, where technology and nature are traditionally seen as opposed. They now appear to merge or even trade places. As many of you know, I'm trying to find the proximity to the microphone. As many of you know, National Geographic magazine has since 1888 been an international symbol of wildlife representation. with high-quality photos and its iconic white-yellow border, educating people, yeah, I'm going to put it back on in a second, all over the world about nature, according to the norms of science. Nature was captured without actually questioning the lens through which it was observed, namely a Western, heteronormative, capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist, patriarchal lens. We have seen animals mating, playing, sleeping, hunting, grazing, rearing children. The wildlife photographer was characterized by its patience and commitment to her, his, their subject, to catch that glimpse, that one image that would place us, the spectator, in awe of nature's greatness and inaccessibility. National Geographic wants to educate people through enchantment with a particular political view, which according to me is outdated and belongs to a world in the past. Over the past 14 years since the popularization of the internet, I have been collecting images of animals online. These to me represent a shifting dialogue around nature and wildlife representation that thus has not been addressed. This publication that I'm about to show you is on reinventing the structure that is based on conventional rules of science and early types of anthropology, and how we can categorize cultures and species according to a model that doesn't reflect on itself and is very limited and outdated by reinventing new categories, such as animals and air, animals and alcohol, or how it's more accurate at this moment, non-human persons. Non-human persons and anger, because as we can see, there's quite a bit of emotion and rebellion going on. We even have an extra double spread. Stuffed animals, friends. I'm going to let this run for a bit. Let me see if it works. Plastic bags, yeah. So, and instead of making statements and stories, maybe we should be asking ourselves questions like, how much do mothers and their babies get paid in zoos? Isn't it time that all animals in the zoo should meet each other? Should putting a non-human person on display for human enjoyment be a sole human right? Can a polar bear develop a love for a bucket, and can this be described as a new non-human person emotion? What animals representation online tells us is something about humans. At what convenience do we love animals? To me, they represent the ultimate cultural shadow, where centuries of suppression through the objectification of nature and the animal, making cruel exploitation possible, now is taken out of that distant thing to use by extreme and perverse representation of the ultimate projection of subjectification on non-human persons. And as a taxonomy of qualities we wish to externalize from the human, like drinks, being like, for example, a need for intimacy. Take a moment and look at these images. What kind of portrait of humanity do you see? If we would send these images into space for aliens to discover our ecosystem, what would they think of humanity? In this process, the animal again is deprived of its dignity, according to my view, and a right to exist, and perform its species' inherent characteristics without human intervention. Who doesn't want to be cuddled? Through this publication, I'm trying to find a language to communicate about distressful situations of oppression created by human behavior, consciously or unconsciously, by inflicting proximity violence on other species, by pointing out the complex entanglement of love in relation to structures of power that people have for non-human persons. The fact that there is an infliction on the animal's inherent worth is often covered up by superficial and selfish desires. What this research shows is what makes the animal move in strange ways is human desires. What appears in these images is that there is an intuitive recognition that these animals are made casualties of purely human problems, such as the modern human's disconnection to the natural world and its own species, and most of all, ourselves. What happens to cute animal babies online? Oops. Sorry. When they grow up. A couple of years ago, I volunteered in a sanctuary for primates called Stichting Aap. Maybe some of you heard about it. Stichting Aap is a highly technologically advanced sanctuary where primates are kept prison for the sake of their own survival. And what I learned is that many of the primates come from medical research and the other half comes from domestic use. But what also happened is that outside of their main cause of taking care of primates that were from medical use or domestic homes, there were often an overload on images, on animals coming from, for example, a popular YouTube video or a new Disney film or some other blockbuster film that was exoticizing an animal that was actually not made to be a human pet, but that became very popular in animal trade. And I want to show you an example of this. We'll come back to this. Anyone knows this one? Super viral. The slow loris is a nocturnal primate from Southeast Asia, which means they are highly sentient, slow loris, relational and intelligent, self-aware species. They are extremely timid creatures which normally move quietly in the darkness of the forest night. They are blinded and disorientated by bright lights. When a slow loris feels threatened, it will hold up its arms to release a toxin which would normally come out of its glands, which are usually removed before they get sold as a pet. Thanks to the millions of hits of this probably YouTube film, slow lorises have become a must-have pet, and they are being plucked from their natural habitat and sold for up to 5,500 euros. Now, nowadays you would be lucky to see a slow loris in the wild. These beautiful creatures are now endangered. Abducted from the wild, they end up in markets where they're surrounded by other animals and people, which is a nightmare for them. Tragically, many of them die from trauma even before they have been sold. If it wasn't bad enough, what these people do to these animals before they are pet ready is the slow lorises have a toxic bite, and because of this, they are sold with their teeth ripped off, and this often happens with nail clippers and causes a lot of infection, which also makes them die sometimes. And this horrible process often causes an infection, yeah. Aren't non-human persons, like humans, molded and remolded by love? Let's see about that. There is an incredible amount of care and love of animal photographs online taken by amateurs. But often it is love and care taken place in a very hybrid and compromised situation for the animals, of which most is an infliction caused by human behavior. I would like to invite you to reflect on the prime beliefs of our cultural construct causing and structuring the infliction of animal lives. This is based on two things. One, our notion for profit. Animals have no right to live unless they are some way of economic use for us. Please prove us with your bodies or characteristics interest, or they should be self-pleasing, entertaining, or of economic interest to us. Do not bother us, too. Do not threaten us. Do not scare us. And don't interfere with anything that is of economic interest for us, so as crops or other kinds of resources. We are left with a clear message. If animals were more intelligent, they would deserve better treatment. This message also contains a warning. If animals were more intelligent, they would also need more control. The concept of human uniqueness has been an organizing nucleus of Western Euro-American culture and informs the basic rules of every day. Lots of things are happening which is new to the history of humans and the history of animals. In the last 200 years, local landscapes have been disrupted and subdued to global landscapes. In order to use science as a tool on other life, bring species to foreign places, kill them in trophy hunts, and use them for all sorts of other means. In this process, animals have been deprived of feelings. Is the animal caged because we love it? We like to look for the animal, for the human inside the animal, but we deny the inner self in the animal. The animal is consumed. The natural world has become a Disney horror scenario with colored fields of babbling animals, all suffering from the Stockholm Syndrome, animals which are being kept hostile by our fantasies, which are projections of our suppressed and disowned parts, our contemporary incapability and lost art of true intimacy. As a continuation of looking deeper into these animal archives and working with the categories and what they spoke to me about what's happening in the environmental crisis, I wanted to interview children about what they thought about the global changes and what's going on and how this will influence their future. And also what was curious, how the idea of the animal online influence their thought of nature. Like, do they actually, what was their ideas about this, and also what was their solutions? So some of the questions that I asked in the publication, I also asked the children, and I want to show you a little excerpt of what comes out of that. And here we also see that the world of the young children is very merged with their technology through which they perceive nature. All of these children are like city children. So they are placed in a collage of the YouTube films that they directly or indirectly have been confronted with.
Come on, move! Move! Easy, easy.
Sweet elephants.
Die hebben we even pauze doen.
Ja, die hebben
Want er worden wel heel veel dingen gefilmd, maar ze hebben wel enigszins ook privacy nodig.
Stel je voor, er staat een hele grote groep mensen en zij zitten dan in een verblijf, zeg maar. Dat is dan ook een beetje bedreigd voelen. Met al die camera's, maar ze weten niet zo goed wat het is en zo. Als je dan opeens een vreemd ding daar ziet, waar dan rare ogen bij zitten. En dat je ziet dat er iets, als je echt het idee hebt dat je wordt bekeken, dan zou ik me echt heel ongemakkelijk voelen.
Vervelend, want je wilt wel even een beetje vrij zijn. En dan wil je niet de hele tijd dat een dier naar je kijkt. Want bijvoorbeeld als ik thuis ben, ik wil dan niet de hele tijd dat iedereen uit je raam de hele tijd kijkt. Dat vinden wij ook niet leuk.
Als het leeuwen zijn, dan denken ze misschien dat het een geweer van een stroper is. Maar als het, ik zeg maar wat, een hond is of zo, dan denkt hij misschien, wat is dat voor iets? Is het iets eetbaars of zo?
En meer zie je nog meer van dat soort toeristen die foto's van hem maken op de Noordpool. Want die willen dan nog even last minute nog even zien hoe de Noordpool eruit ziet voordat hij is gesmolten. En dan heeft hij dus geen privacy meer.
Kijk, bijvoorbeeld als je op safari bent en een leeuw die loopt steeds weg omdat hij zich ongemakkelijk voelt en je gaat met de auto daar achteraan jagen met die camera, dan zou het net zo goed zijn als zo'n man in een auto, als jij gewoon even rustig wil lopen, achter jou aangaat.
Ja.
Terwijl je in je auto zit.
En je weet niet eens wat een auto is, misschien is het wel een monster of zo. En dan zou ik echt rennen voor mijn leven.
Als er heel veel mensen naar pinguïns gaan kijken, denk ik dat ze er wel een beetje gek van worden. Maar hopelijk hebben ze in de meeste dierentuinen ook gewoon een rots waar ze zich achter kunnen verschuilen.
Want als mensen schreeuwen, dan gaan ze snel in het hok.
De ijsbeer wil dat er meer privacy voor hem komt, want daar op zijn Noordpool valt hij ook niet zoveel op. En daar is hij gewoon gewend dat hij privacy heeft.
Misschien vinden de dieren het wel niet leuk dat jullie foto's maken. Dus misschien kunnen jullie wel gewoon 1, 2 foto's maken. En dan gewoon
Dieren die beroemd willen worden, denk ik dat die denken, ik kan fietsen, ik kan fietsen. En ik denk dat dieren die niet beroemd willen worden denken, ik wil niet op internet, ik wil niet op internet.
Ik denk dat dieren niet de wet kunnen overtreden, want het zijn geen mensen. Dus er is nooit aan hun verteld, jij mag niet over dat lijkkleer, want dan krijg je een boete van €50.
Ik bedoel, als er in één land over de weg loopt, dat is natuurlijk ook tegen de wet. Maar dan kun je wel heel boos worden en schreeuwen en doen alsof het een groep mensen is die opeens op de snelweg staat. Maar ik bedoel, ik bedoel dat één land dan kan beter boos worden op jou, omdat er opeens een raar eng ding op zich af komt rijden.
Sowieso op de mens, want al die fabrieken en zo zijn niet te geloven.
S'nachts gaan ze stiekem in de broodlaan, andere laas kijken of er wat eetbaars te vinden is. Of ze begrijpen wel hoe ze zitten. Bijvoorbeeld, hij weet niet dat het de wet is. Dus als je het overtreedt is het eigenlijk, dan kan je hem niet de schuld voor geven.
Alles wat eetbaar voor hen is, pakken ze, eten ze op.
Ik denk wel dat mensen dieren straffen omdat ze iets doen wat volgens ons niet mag.
De doodstraf krijgen.
Je moet er rekening mee houden dat zij geen rekening hoeven te houden met jou.
A good thing about animal pictures online is that the notion of human uniqueness becomes harder to deny, because the access to images on the internet trample down the awareness that only humans possess self-awareness, language, culture, land, and customs. According to Dr. Gay Bradshaw, founder of Transspecies Psychology and writer of Elephants on the Edge, also speaking in the magazine, values to survive as a species include a study of mind and emotions that serve both humans and animals. From birth, many species, parrots, elephants, people, dolphins, chimpanzees, etc., depend on relationships to survive. Persuaded to desire more and more, obsessions led to confuse happiness with progressive acquisition. Looking at the world from an other species point of view, animals are like people, because people are like animals. And again, what do these pictures tell us about humanity? Human appreciate a likeness and denying a likeness when it becomes inappropriate for them. A grotesque funhouse mirror of the current scientific economic model and animal pictures presented in the media. What happens if the process of loving bonding is absent or interrupted? The infant's learning path is altered. Ruptures to primary bonds constitute relational trauma. Understanding the history of human traumatology and its place in science and society is important to our exploration of wildlife. For example, elephants or lions' behavior, because of its intrinsic, relational, and therefore unavoidable political nature. A right to survive implies agency, selfhood, validity, and relationships. But intimacy carries a taint of the forbidden. Blurring the line between ourselves and the other animals threatens our sense of humanity. Our cultural emphasis on sight, for example, makes us forget that animals are born in a lit matrix of touch. They smell fast and sound and well, experience joy, fun, laughter, tenderness, experience heartbreak, anger, sadness, and fear, all visible in these images and also in the videos, and interweaving their environment in a much elaborate species-crossing arena than scientists are telling us. What amateur images of animals online teach us are exceptions on scientific rules and of a more expanded thought than we ever thought was possible. That on scientific rules are more expanded than we ever thought was possible. We observe animals and we observe humans and other animals share a common capacity to think, feel, and experience themselves and their lives. Number of studies have demonstrated that multiple species of non-human animals experience empathy, culture, self-awareness, consciousness, psychological trauma, mourning rituals, and complex communication abilities. It's a horror to exclude love as a biological category. How would a world look like where instead of objectification, attachment and care stood central? We are all molded and remolded by those who have loved us. It is not just a human thing. It belongs to all of us who are reared. Excluding a simple, yet so evident notion as love from the dialogue of science will keep exploitation possible. behavioral ecology, erosion of the species, we are at split in time, those who acknowledge simultaneous uniqueness and sameness, and those who doubt the equivalence of animals with humans. Where do you stand? When does a lion stop being a lion? Issues around animals and human-animal conflicts are not about the animals, but about human conflicts revolving around questions of social justice. Made evident in this publication is the idea that animals were taken out of their local habitat and whose natural landscape have been too much invaded by humans, and so are confronted with changes in their species and therefore having a bicultural identity, that of a human and that of their own. These images show us situations new to the history of species. Therefore, my proposal here is that species need to be redefined and renamed in the new natural or more popular Anthropocene, or perhaps the Cuddle Tropocene. What this means is that a lion captured and living in a zoo or sanctuary or wildlife reserve for generation after generation is perhaps no longer a lion, as they have lost capacities inherent to their species in the wild, such as hunting. Instead of hunt, the lion is conditioned to be cuddled in order to receive food. Will language used to communicate, where language that used to be used to communicate wounded antelope be replaced by things such as, hey, watch out, there are Germans, they only want one hug. Or, hey, these are the Japanese, you need to keep your ear more sideways and smile. Or there's an American, they want to ride back, and if you wipe your tail, you get some extra candies. Species languages are being lost, and new ones are being born. Many claims on behalf of animals do not compete with real human needs at all, and therefore do not seem to stand in the same queue. Donaldson and Kim Lika proposed to shift the debate about non-human animals from moral theory and applied ethics to political theory. In their political theory of animal rights, non-human animals are seen as political actors. Different types of animals stand in different relations to human political communities. And although we should respect the basic and inviolable rights of the animals, these different relations leads to different rights and obligations. Domesticated animals should be seen as citizens in shared human-animal communities. Wild animals form their own sovereign communities, and liminal animals who are wild but live amongst humans should be seen as Denisians. Who benefits from the representation of non-human persons online? I'm going to give it another attempt, because it's a little boring like this. Okay. Who benefits from the representation of non-human persons online? Attitudes to animals are influenced by media coverage. Getting positive coverage can mean the difference between life and death. Maybe the animal who is best at manipulating the internet with its cute factor is the panda. Question: what do you think of if you think of a panda? It's hard to imagine nowadays a panda walking wild in a bamboo forest. If I think about a panda, I think of them tumbling down a slide, sneezing on a viral video, or jumping up and down with a ball with 10 other panda toddlers. Or being bottle-fed by a Chinese person dressed in a panda suit. The giant panda is an endangered species, with only about 1,600 of them living in the wild mountains of central China, and more than 300 in captivity worldwide. Giant pandas first became endangered in 1990 due to the excessive poaching in the 80s and deforestation, depleting their bamboo food source. Taking into perspective that variation of how we are raised is responsible for the many variations of the theme of being animal, this has changed largely for this giant. Enormous effort has been done in preventing the panda from going extinct, which has led to a character of the panda. Pandas have power over us. The Oxford scholars call this soft, cuddly power. Pandas fake pregnancies to get treats. They receive a service of panda porn to teach them how to have sex. Due to their extreme choosiness about their mates, they have problems reproducing. They have an extensive dating life. They have rooms with music and air conditioning. Once they do mate, captivity seems to throw off the maternal instinct of many panda mothers, causing them to abandon or even harm their cubs. They have their caretakers dressed up as giant pandas and breastfeed. The interesting paradox here is that on the one hand, the dynamics of panda power on international relations and the value market, today of most main trading partners have had the chances to rent pandas through the rate of at least $500,000 a year. Two giant pandas who were symbolically gifted to the Netherlands by China during the state visits of our royal couple in 2015, they arrived at the Netherlands following a 16 period of consultations and preparations. Basically, this is a lease. If baby pandas are born, the zoo is allowed to keep them for 4 years. After that, they will return to the breeding center in China. They were briefly displayed in cages at the airport before being transported to the Oudehands Zoo in Renen. KLM is one of the few airline companies with its own animal hotel at Schiphol Airport. It is fully equipped to care for animals before, during, and after their journey. Specially trained animal stewards ensure that the animals travel as comfortably and safely as possible in a partitioned environment. And on the other hand, their complete inability to adapt to human activities in areas that were once wild, such as raccoons, this is not possible for the panda because they solely eat of bamboo and have a very slow digestive system. They cannot simply move to cities like a lot of other animals. Pandas' average lifespan is up to 15 to 20 years, but they can live up to 30 in captivity. Giant pandas are generally solitary. While the panda is a highly represented animal online, the panda species as itself is not very interesting for preservation of an ecosystem at all. The wide area in which the panda lives would do fine without the actual panda, a carnivore turned vegetarian. But because of the preservation of this large-scale animal, which needs a huge piece of forest to get its dietary needs met, a wide range of less cute or simply ugly animals, like insects, worms, amphibians, birds, goats, and even plants and microbes and other less interesting species to us humans are being preserved. The giant panda serves as an umbrella that helps to preserve dozens of other species. In the near future, I am sure we will all be able to have a little designer midget panda as our pet. Is anger a right only humans have? Animals resist into becoming what modern humanity wants to make from them: passive objects in zoos, circuses, safari rides, romantic decorations, dotting the landscapes for eager eyes, peering from Land Rovers or data to tantalize our mind. Invasion of their natural habitats often leads to problems, simply often asking to live in the land of their birth, where their dignity is acknowledged and respected. They permit themselves behavior, eating crops, aggression, sabotage, revenge, only allowed for humans. It takes a lot for a herbivore to start to kill. Emotional abuse can be invisible and often mistaken for love by those who are trapped in a cycle of abuse in their relationship. Trauma is surviving is surviving easy to overlook when the abuse masquerades by us someone caring for you. A lot of this is made clear through somatic trauma study, which shows us that similar effects of trauma, such as PTSD or CTPSD, are consequences of internalized conflicting human behavior, such as the extreme incapability or contradictory behavior of, on the one hand, love and care, and on the other hand, imprisonment, control, and violence. Animals whose natural landscape is rapidly shrinking are stepping out of their assigned role as part of the passive landscape against which human dramas played out, and become actors of a will of their own, and in so upset the human sense of order and therefore are killed. Psychological trauma that many of these animals suffer from change the future identities of these species in a fundamental way, an irrevocable way, including trauma preserved in their bodies, memories influencing future generations. People appreciate a likeness and denying a likeness when it becomes inappropriate to them. Issues: out of 14,000 Asian elephants, only one-third is held in captivity. One-third is held in captivity. Elephants in captivity can take on human habits and psychology. If you are no longer able to change the situation, you are challenged to change yourself. Abuse, neglect, and traumatic attachment lead to a loss of ability to regulate intense feelings, producing asocial behaviors. What the mind cannot hold, the body does. Health issues derive directly from the harsh physical conditions, an indirect form of chronic and emotional and psychological stress that undermines the immune system. The point is that behavior and species boundaries are a continuing dialectic which can be understood only in terms of a continuing dialectic between an active and changing organism and an active and changing environment, with cause and consequences closely interwoven. The ruptures of the lens of non-human persons, their lives and history, is mirror of the legacy of the rupture of their brains, bodies, and behavior, and that comes to us through their representation. The object of interest is not just the animal or environment, but the dialogical space in between, which turns out to be the site of drama, seen through the lens of funny images, which, ironically, gives people a sight of relief, making the destruction of their earth seem less gruesome. Thank you.
Some people are fleeing the premises. Humans. Thank you, Melanie, for your enlightening talk.
Is it working?
Yes. Is everybody okay? Yes? Are we still feeling it? Thank you for this talk. Thanks for the invitation to have this conversation with you. I was wondering, because a lot of the scenarios you're talking about in your speech and in your work are focusing on this problem that we're quite tone deaf to the non-human world, which is not just individuals, but mostly it's political and economic systems and cultural ideas about animals. Is there a way we could, as individuals, as people, rebel against those confinements, against this tone deafness? How do you see us in our daily lives or in our more intellectual processing of these ideas?
Well,
could we rebel against this?
Well, one of the ways is that the whole idea is that we are made to believe that intelligence comes from the mind, but we could also propose that feeling is a form of intelligence, and that perhaps we find more vocabulary around defining what we're actually feeling inside of our body. And and so put the emphasis more on like what's going on inside of my body and how does it feel in the proximity of another species or another human, or even in the confrontation of a new concept. So that could be, for example, one thing, because all this work also aligns to like we share similar physiology and bodies. We have a similar nervous system that is responding to our environment, our bodies, and our environments are interwoven, and they are creating our behavior and in our social group, and the parallels between that is where we can find an entrance to that. Instead of focusing on the separation, we focus on the similarities.
Yeah. So that would be a way to start engaging in a more profound way, perhaps. I was reading The Guardian, that the British newspaper, The Guardian, committed to a 2019 climate crisis pledge. Anybody read about this? They want to talk about journalism and especially how we can imagine climate crisis as the defining issue of our time. And one of the ways in which they want to rethink journalism is about the imagery they're using. And so you're talking about the panda, and of course we think of polar bears when it comes to climate crisis journalism and messages. But one of their main goals now is to diminish that emphasis on polar bears and pandas, precisely because, for one, it's not always accurate in the documentation or the reporting about climate issues, but mostly they feel that people have become detached because it is the ultimate other, and the polar bear is not my family, and so somehow it seems to create a distance. And so they're making way for more human faces of climate catastrophes. Well, I'm still puzzling what to make of this. Like, do we need more animal pictures to show the urgency? Do we need more polar bears? Do we need less, in The Guardian, in serious journalism? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe we need more of education about how to read these images, because eventually what we see in these images is who has the power, and on who has this power influence. And what you can see is that the power is there where the money is. So, and if a polar bear is perhaps has no economic interest because they're living in the North Pole and they're maybe just annoying, it's just the sentiment that is being spoken about in the media. But if the polar bear finds a way to be of economic interest by, for example, exploiting that sentiment and people going to the North Pole to see the last polar bear, then suddenly the species is again interesting, and there will be breeding programs and all that. But yeah, if it really helps for climate change, I don't know. You can also look at like people hugging animals and see, the horror of the power dynamics going out of control.
I also think there's some kind of paradox there, right? So on the one hand, it feels like we need to stay in touch with the human let's say devastation and destruction of these ecological environments and what it does to the animals. And at the same time, move away from the exploitation of the images. Another thing I was thinking about in preparing for this evening was the beautiful performance you did 3 years ago in Tate Modern, where you presented sounds of animals, which is a completely different type of recording of animal behavior. How do you look at the differences between the images that you've collected, and we've seen a lot of, and the non-human sounds that you presented and collected? Is there a difference in how they are collected, for instance, or how we can relate to what these non-human persons are
Yeah.
expressing.
I think this was a sound project where data was collected on contemporary nature sounds, which are always, just as the images, interfere with human traces. So it involved more compilation of animal sounds and technological inventions from science, such as tracking devices and photo cameras and all kinds of other machines like cars, and so it was more like, this is the new natural sound, and so in that one it's played more into the audioscape than in the visuals.
Is there a way for us to find a more sensual way, and how could we use our senses to have a better understanding of these problems? Because it feels to me that a lot of the issues that we're talking about stay distant, because even if I'm not uploading or watching, let's say, this animal or the wildlife picture exploitation, then still it's going on. Like I'm really thinking about our own senses, or a more creative way to think of how we can understand the problems. Is that through like imagination? Is that what you feel like art provides for you, like a pocket where you can use these different perspectives and like channel them?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the ways to communicate is just this whole data of like the images that crashed in the program, just to see what kind of impression all these, like, so many of these images leave, for example, in a human body. Like in my body, for example, I wanted to make a film about animal rights and what was going on now, and how the image of the animal has changed for me, you know, and how I saw it coming from like this romantic notion of nature, that the proximity just became closer and closer and closer. And also I didn't want to make a film about like the evil human, you know, like obviously harming the animal in a brutal way, but how I felt after collecting all these images and archiving them for like months was like I almost became sick, you know, because the subliminal, like that the violence is so subtle, but it works through in this more like, grotesque way, gets under your nerves. Like the first 100 images, you still think like, oh wow, I wish I was in this video, but after 1,000, then it becomes horror, because of learning how to read the images better. Yeah.
And what's behind them, and like the beautiful example and the horrifying example of the Saint Lawrence.
Slow Lawrence.
Slow Lawrence.
Yeah.
Yes. So it only made it worse in a very short way of putting it.
It was the same, but just seen through its opposite lens of extreme subjectification. But it was still about power, and about the suppression of the animal, or using it or utilizing it. And
maybe before, because I have so many questions, I think we could talk for a very long time. Maybe we can also look at the audience for a moment to see. I've been informed that there's a flying box, which speaks to my imagination, and it's called a couch box. And if I am correct, if the box lands in your lap, or if you intend it to be landed in your lap, then you can speak into it and we will hear you better. So it's like a flying mic, but less phallic. Anyone?
Okay, I have to speak here. Oh, it works.
Oh, it works.
Amazing.
Awesome. Technology.
Great. Technology, yes. I have a question about your idea about the images as well, because there were two parts that were interesting and sort of was slightly confusing to me. At first you mentioned the images that were the classic images of nature, like Natural Geography, or like the Dutch-American photographer Frans Lanting, for example. He's very much known for his photography of monkeys and in the natural habitat. And then you put the opposition with these more internet images, and you said like, it's so horrible that they're getting what would be if there was no objectification of these animals through the camera. And what I think personally is that the camera itself, or photography itself, serves for objectification of living beings. It also happens with humans a lot, of course. Like, for example, African children that are photographed for the meaning of raising funds. They're always shown in complete isolation when they're photographed. Whereas a lot of children in African communities are very much around families, communities, and so on. So my question is, how would you imagine a more photography or filming of these animals where they don't get objectificated, but where we can empathize? Would that be going back to this classic thought of natural geography, photography? Or would it be a different way, or how could you imagine something like that?
Could it be a different type of recording?
Yeah, could there be
of their inner beings?
Yeah, could there be a way where we can empathize in a better way than, because these internet images, they're in a way, well, I wouldn't say good, but what I find more positive about them than the National Geography ones is that they are more authentic, that they show more what we humans actually think about these animals. Whereas the classic photography of animals often had like also a very romanticized idea about animals that would never show certain things that happen to animals.
Melanie,
like mating.
Maybe we should give the
Response.
camera to the animals and see what comes out of it, which also happens a lot. But yeah, I don't think it's possible to have a neutral image, you know, it's always colored, and so I don't have an answer to that, and it's also, that's not really what is my interest, you know. My interest is more like, where is the power in the image, and who has the power to take that image? And yeah, what it shows is that, for example, people who are in the more richer countries in the world travel more, so, and traveling to exotic animal places is a luxury, and it's very popular. So who do we see on the images are, you know, mostly like white people cuddling an exotic pet in an exotic country. Like, that's one way of like showing how power travels, and what are they doing there anyways, you know. Like, it's like a domination of nature again, and it's nothing neutral about it. Or like kissing dolphins, it's like every person goes to the same dolphin retreat, kisses the same dolphin as a sort of, you know, union with the ultimate free-spirited animal in the wild, like a dream come true. But you know, the horror behind these images, that's what interests me.
Maybe one of the things that came to mind with the dolphins especially is that a few years ago in 2015 here at the IMPAKT Festival, we also had a huge image on the main screen of swimming with dolphins. It was by Tobias Revel, thinker from the UK. And he was also pointing out, aside from the animal cruelty, that almost the danger of this concept of authenticity and the status it holds in our culture is that it only is validated through images, right? You better make a picture of you kissing a dolphin or it might as well not happen. And so it's almost like becoming a double bind.
Not like connecting to the dolphin, and the dolphin is just, it's trapped, you know.
It was anyway also not that I was looking for a more neutral image, but I was thinking, okay, how can we find a more positive empathy, and also through the reading of image. But I totally agree also with what you said before, that we need to learn better or need to be taught how to read these images. Mm-hmm. So that also like gave me a thought on that.
Yes, another catcher, yes.
Hi, thanks for that, Melanie. I just wanted to make a comment. I think image making is tied to this power relation of owning the landscape and owning animals, because if you think of the representations of Lascaux, for example, it's the same power relationship exerted through image making and it's predatory. So it goes further back than the creation of internet, just like an art historical reference. And actually the Netherlands was leading in the representation of animals in painting, with paintings of cows in the 17th century. So this is as old as humanity, this power relationship exerted through image making of nature.
But of course now you see so much exceptions, like, you know, like all these baby animals are being bottle fed. Why are they being bottle fed? You know, like what is happening really behind these images? Why are they not fed by their mothers? Why, you know, why are they separated, and who benefits from these images? So, you know, that's one thing. That's alcohol, you know, food, urbanization, the animal moving into human spaces. Yeah.
Is there a way for us to think about technology and interfaces, except for just simply handing over the animals a camera to smash or to take like very valuable selfies with? Aside from those, let's say, more cultural anecdotes, and aside from, for instance, these genetic data banks for extinct species, which are upcoming, and there are huge scientific prestige projects by which, I don't know, somehow the message seems to perpetuate that, you know, we devastated nature, but no worries, we can recreate them in a lab. Aside from these notions of technology around these problems, would there be a way to imagine technology as a more empowering tool?
Well, if you look at that some of these images are actually useful for some species, you know, like the top 5 on the extinction list, like perhaps it will change because they are being popularized and technology will help them continue to live. But on the other hand, yeah, maybe not, I don't know.
Or would it be thinkable to create technology alongside or through non-human desires and needs, for instance?
What do you mean?
That is maybe too sci-fi or too imaginary, but I'm thinking maybe that's speculation, and, you know, when bad comes to worse, sometimes you have to almost move beyond the possible. Mm-hmm. I'm really thinking of, in what way could non-human agency be protected by understanding how they would use it, how non-human agents would and persons would like to use technology, maybe weapons, just simply to get out of the zoo. But
yeah, that's of course we don't know. Maybe because that's very much like a human perspective again. Yeah. But perhaps it does make sense to give them rights and passports and personhood, like as it is also happening now in some countries that, you know, orangutan got personhood in Argentina, or
river,
or also like what was said by one of the curators, like should they be protected online because all the or in virtual reality, because the more they upload it, less they are here in their bodies, alive with a pulse on this planet. So maybe that will happen.
Oh, I get a stop sign. I think I've been ignoring a lot of signs. That means that there's no further questions allowed in the catch box flying mic. But that does leave me to this last moment of really thanking you again for the beautiful speech that you gave, which was very informative and heartbreaking, unfortunately. And I will look forward to be following your work as you move on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see how long this chord is. Oh, it's long enough. Thanks, Melanie, and Thanks, Ilga. We're about halfway tonight's program, and there's a lot more to see, of course, in the upcoming days, but also already tonight. We have Chris Salter and Alexandre Soignet, and they will be performing Totem. This was scheduled at 9:45 and 10:30. I think we've got a bit of a delay, so it might be a bit later, but it's in Studio 2, upstairs. And we'll have a new film by John Raffman, Disasters Under the Sun. It will be screened here in a repeat screening, so you can come and go as you please. It's a 7-minute film. And we have Sander Veenhoff, and you can join him and his Futurotech in the lobby. So enjoy. Thanks very much for being here, and let's end with a warm round of applause for the curators, the artists, and the speakers.